Okay, welcome back. The video part of our series for the 2020 lab. This time we'll set up a cluster, a Windows cluster, and in the next video we will do an SQL cluster using the Windows cluster. So what we're going to do, because this is a VM lab, what we need to do is have shared disks. So if you have a real environment, which would have two servers connecting to some shared storage, such as an iSCSI server, running storage, or a NAS or something like that. In this case here, what we're going to do is emulate a NAS or a iSCSI device using our domain controller. So our domain controller, what we've done is we've added a 100 gigabyte disk for now, and that 100 gigabyte disk will give us the space we need to set up our cluster. Because this is a demo cluster, it's only going to have 10 and 15 gigabyte disks, not anything big. But if you are doing something with iSCSI, or if you want to do this as a bigger setting, you can set up a few 100 gigabyte disk if you wish to. So from there, you could do that. So let's get logged in. Let's go full screen. Okay, so we log in, and the first thing we do, we just recently patched. So now we're up and running. And we're running standard 2019 server, and it's running in trial mode. So we have 151 days left for this trial to get this project done of the 2019 server lab. So the first thing we do is we want to pull up the server manager. Second thing, I want to pull up the Explorer. So we have a second disk. I made a folder called iSCSI Virtual Disks. Pull up computer management. We could use the server manager as well, but I'd rather pull up server manager just to have different tools available. We look at the disks. That 100 gigabyte drive I added is right here. I called it iSCSI, and that's what we're doing. So just to give you some context of what I set up ahead of time, if you need to add a disk to your VM, you could just click your VM. So back out of full screen, click on your VM, settings, add a hard disk, leave it as recommended, create a new disk, put the size you need, and then you could do store single or multiple, as previously said in previous videos. If you go single virtual, store as a single file, it's a little better performance. If you have multiples, it's got to go from file to file to read any or write any data. So depending on your system, if you're running slower disks, then it's going to take a little longer. So that's how you add a disk. So I have the 100 gigabyte disk. Go full screen again. And let's get started. So I have a 100 gigabyte disk sitting there with nothing on it, just a folder. So what we need to do now is we need to go to Add Roles, Next, Next, and then you want to add a role to this server. You want to click on File and Storage, open up File and iSCSI Services, and I have both, but you only need to add the iSCSI target server. Once you highlight that and click Next, it's going to ask you for the disk to install software from the ISO. I already have the ISO mounted, as previous videos have showed you how to do this. So I have the ISO mounted already with the Windows Server 2019 attached. Now, when I do that install, next, it will go ahead and install the component. So now what we want to do is go to File and Services, right? File and Storage Services, and we want to click on iSCSI. So what we're doing now is we're going to set up some disks in Windows to present out to other servers as their storage targets. Again, if this was a real environment, you'd have a NAS or something like that to do this with. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a disk. Now, when we're talking clustering, we want to create a few disks. So let's give you an idea here. Put this over here in the corner. Now, the first disk we want to do is a quorum disk. Second disk we want to do, because we're setting up an SQL cluster, I want to create a SQL data disk, an SQL logs for your transaction logs. And then we want to do an SQL back for backups. You can do as many as you wish, but for our clustering demo, this is all we're going to have. This quorum disk is more the monitoring disk between the two hosts. So that's what that's going to be. It's like a system drive for them. And the SQL data, logs, and back will be for the SQL setup. So we're just going to do this beforehand, so we need 4 disks. So I'll move this out of the way, and I'll bring it back in a minute. So what we want to do is we're on the server that we're on. We want to choose E, because that's where we want to place them. Click Next. And we want to name this disk. So this one here is going to be the quorum. Click Next. And I'll just back up here for a sec. You notice how it's creating a VHDX. So this is a virtual hard drive. So this is using the Windows hypervisor. It's using the virtualization disks, right? Virtual hard drive. So we're running a virtual hard drive on a file, on a folder. So that's what this is doing. Okay, and we want to set this up as 1 gigabyte. It doesn't have to be big at all. 1 gigabyte is fine. And you can do fixed if you wish. I just use dynamic, because if it has to grow, let it grow. Next. Now the iSCSI target. Now I created an iSCSI target previously. I want to create a new one just to show you how to do it. We click new, and we want to create an iSCSI target. So let's say this is our 2020 lab initiator. Okay. Next. Click the specific initiators that will access. So now what you need to do, we just need to pop out of here for a second. What we need to do is add the 2 servers to the initiator list. So from this little the window being lower now, we need to add the file server. So now my previous tests I did this, so let's find out. So we want to go here and we want to type in FS1. Click browse. Okay. 1. Check name, and it finds file server 1 2019 from the active directory. Click OK, and we have file server 1 added. We want to add one more server, FS2. Okay. Browse. We could just click FS2. Browse. We don't actually have to type FS2 first. So click there. OK. Click OK. Finding FS2. There we go. So both initiators are set up. So these machines are going to initiate the connection back to get to these disks. So now we have both servers are going to connect. Now let's click out for a second to go to these servers. You see here now, all there is the C drive and the E drive. So disk 0 and 1 on both of these hosts. Log in. Just showing you here that this is, it has a C and an E drive. Go here. This should pop up in a second. Go back to the other server. You see the disk there using the disk manager, the computer manager. Let's do there again. Find the server manager is a little delayed. Some of these, I don't allocate too much RAM to these VMs, so this could be the issue too. So there you go, file servers came up. So all we have right now is the 2 disks, 0 and 1, right? Same thing we see here. I just wanted to verify that for you. We'll leave that window up. We'll leave this window up to see if anything pops up. Let's go back to the domain controller. Let's go full screen. So now we have added the 2 servers that we want to connect to this disk that we're creating. Click next. This is where we put security in. So because it is iSCSI, it's over the network. If anybody connects to it and decides to try and figure out where this iSCSI drives are being presented on the network, they could just get there with if you don't put any password or any lockdown. So you could put enable for your chat password, right? This is a challenge password. So what you want to do is put name and your password. So this way they know a login account to get to the disk. If you don't put one, then anybody who puts an iSCSI target hooked up to this can get there. So for security purposes, you may want to do this. For our demo, we're not going to do it. So now this is what we're doing. Create. Going to create a disk and a target. Okay. Full screen this. So we have the disk, the quorum, and this is our target. What we want to do now is we want to add those other disks that I mentioned. Right? Want to those other disks I mentioned, we want to create SQL data, logs, and back. So let's go back here. Full screen again. Task, new disk. Right? We want to put on E again because that's where we're putting all our virtual hard drives. This one here we're going to call SQL data. Creating a virtual hard drive again. Next. This one here we want to give, let's give 15 gigabytes for the data drive. We're going to use the 2020 lab initiator. If you've created previous ones and gotten rid of them, you have to actually remove them properly. So this way they don't stick in here still. But for now, we'll just ignore this one exists and use the 2020 lab initiator. Next. And now it will go and create another disk. You notice how that was a little quicker because the first time it had to create this and then add the disk. Let's add another disk. Okay, SQL logs. Let's do 10 gigabytes. This way we know, as you saw here, I'm choosing the 2020 and create. Done. And now let's create the backup drive. This one here, let's go 13, just so we know which one's which. Name initiator, create, and there's the disks. So now we have the disk created on the domain controller, on the E drive, have 3 disks created. See, they're disks, hard disk images. These are virtual hard drives, so they're presented to other servers. So inside of our VM environment, we have virtual drives inside of virtual servers. So let's go back to the file servers. See how there's nothing there. Let's rescan. What we need to do now is we need to configure the target. So we need to go to start button, go to Windows Administrative Tasks, look for iSCSI Initiator. What we need to do is tell this thing how to get to that server. So our target, we said, was called 2020 Lab Initiator. So let's go back to the server and type 2020 Lab Initiator. Quick connect. Okay, doesn't find it. So let's try looking up the server name. We know this server. Right? It's called 2019 DC. Let's confirm the IP. 22. Okay. So the host name is 2019 DC. Let's go to the file server. Type in 2019 DC. Because we're in the domain, it should find it. And there we go. Like I said, this is the one previously left behind from another test. So let's click OK. There's the disks. We have a 1 gig, a 15 gig, a 10 gig, and a 13 gig. So now what we want to do, let's name these. Let's create them. Let's initiate them online. Okay. Initialize the disk, always GPT. This one here, we're going to format, alt, form. Said the 15 gigabyte one was going to be called SQL data. Next one, the 10 gigabyte one was going to be called SQL logs. And we said this one was going to be called SQL back. So let's go to File Explorer. What drives do we have now? We have FGHI. You need to remember those. FGHI. And let's go to the second server now. And you notice they're not there. Well, that's because we have to go to the initiator, to activate them. Let's go to the initiator, start Windows Admin Tools, iSCSI initiator. This is not running. So let's say yes. Let's make sure this service is running. We may not have it installed. So we could go back here if we want, but let's just go here. Started. So what happened here was the service wasn't started because I had done some patching and turned it off. In this case here, 2019 DC, connect, it sees the target, lab initiator, connect, it's now connected and done. Click OK. And now we have, see how they're formatted, but they're not showing. We need to create online. Now what this is doing is sharing the disks. So let's take a look. Okay, online. So what we have to do now, because you can't really share disks between servers, you'll get a bunch of errors. So we have FGHI. So what we want to do now is we want to install the clustering tool. Keep that up there so we know what that is. Let's go to our server manager. Add roles. Of course, it doesn't want to let you do it yet because first thing it does when you fire up server manager, it wants to initialize everything. Add roles again. Next. This is the server we want. Now what we could do is we can also add in FS2. Right? It's not going to see it. So we'll go here. And what we want to do here is go to File Services. And you see how you have all your file services there. What we want to do is we want to look for a service called clustering, Windows clustering. So we want to go next, scroll down, previously here, go back into here. From a previous lab, we set up the previous services, and I think we may have messed something up here. I want to double check. So go here, got the file services, file servers installed. We're looking for is Windows clustering services. Go next. The other tab. There you go. So what we're looking for is failover clustering. And then so you find failover clustering, add features, next. And then you want to specify a location. Now what we've done is we've added the ISO here. right, on the VM. We previously went in and said the ISO for Windows 2016 or 2019 is right here. And because that's mapped, it goes to the D drive. So what we need to do when we do this is we need to make sure that we see D. So the source here, where it says the little demo, we want to say D sources SXS/ click OK and install. This will use the ISO to install the tools. Now let's flip over to server 2. Go full screen and show you through this. So I want to minimize all this because we don't care about that disk information now. We want to pull up Server Manager again. Right. We want to add roles. Next. Of course, there's FS2. We want to look for failover services, right? So we want to go over to Next and go over here to failover clustering. Click Add. Now double check that we are connected to the ISO, which we are. E. So failover clustering. Next. Specify source. D sources. S. Now I'm showing you the Windows clustering setup. Now this doesn't necessarily mean you're doing it just for SQL. You could be doing it for if you're trying to set up a hypervisor and you're trying to set up so you could share VMs between the storage, you could do that as well. But in this case, I'm just trying to get this done for our next lab, which is SQL clustering. I'm going to minimize this, go back up here, bring this back down from full screen, flip over to the server number 1, and a restart is pending. So once it's done, let's click here. Let's go to restart. Go to server number 2. Click on this task. Installation is still going. We can pull it up here. It's completing. It has completed. A restart is necessary. So let's go here to restart. Okay. Go. Both file servers should have rebooted. Keep in mind, this is 2019 server. It's very similar to 2016 because in all reality, 2019 is just 2016 with updates. If you go back to Windows 10, we had the fall update, the April update. Anytime they've done a major update, that would be another version of Windows 10, really. But Microsoft has decided and said that they're keeping with Windows 10, so it will be called Windows 10. There won't be 11, 12, whichever at the moment. So they're following the similar thing with Apple did with OS X, right? OS X and be named every update you do. So in this case here for server, what they've done, because there's such major updates, they've called it Server 2019. The problem here is server is based on year. So the last server update was 2016. So when you start talking about 2016 server, you're wow, that's really old. It's almost like talking like XP, you know, so old. Server-based operating systems are all based on year. So we had server 2008, we had server 2012, we had server 2016, and we have server 2019. So you take a look, 8 to 12 is 4 years, and then 12 to 16 is 4 years, and then 16 to 19 is 3 years. So start seeing some major updates happening. So because they named it after the year, that's why we end up stuck with the year. So let's go here now, see if we have the clustering tool installed. And there you go. We have Failover Cluster Manager. We won't pull that up. Of course, in 2019, they want you to use Admin Center. So let's just close this for now. We just want this tool. So Failover Cluster now, we have to confirm several things. One, we have the disks. Here's the disk, the quorum, the data, the logs, and the back. Okay, so let's create a cluster. Server name, browse, 1, check, and FS2. This is going to go out to the Active Directory, confirm the servers exist. Server FS2 might not be up right now. Double check. Yep, it's online. There you go. Full screen again. So it took a couple seconds for it to get. So basically what we've done is we've told it these are the two servers we want in this cluster. And then do you want to run automatic config? Yes. Let's see what's going on. So next. Before you begin, okay. We're local admins. And that's the one thing when you're making a cluster, what you have to see is when you run, normally you aren't running it on a domain controller, but this is good to see. We're going to pull up, we're on our file server, right? Yes. So we're on our file server. What you want to do is you want to pull up the domain controller. You have to see this. This is something a lot of people don't realize if they're new to clustering. So if you're new to clustering, what you need to do, you need to pull up administrative tools and you want to bring up the ADUC, Active Directory Users Computers. So you notice here, computers. There's our computer names, right? I joined a Mac, that was a previous video. So these are our desktops and our servers. So FS1, FS2. Keep in mind that those are the only servers. Let's go to file server 1 and we will flip back because I want to show you something here. So let's go file server 1 and now we're starting to do the tests. This is going to go through all the tests to make sure everything we're doing will allow us to run the cluster. Sometimes you'll run into some errors that you could just bypass and ignore anyway. Let's take a look at what we have. Now you always want to try and have as many green as possible, because once this cluster setting goes through, it's checking to see if your network adapters. What you should have is 2 network adapters. Because remember, you're doing failover clustering, right? If a server goes down, you want the other one to go down. So you want all the things you do to be duplicate. So you want to have 2 network cards. You want to have 2 sets or a set of disks. You want to have 2 servers. You want to have 2 power supplies, 2 CPUs. You want to have all these things. So this way, the failover cluster says that anything that fails can fail over to the opposite sides. So if the network adapter fails, it could have it. Sometimes what they used to do, previous versions of clustering I've set up, is a second network adapter that had a heartbeat between each other. So this way they can inform each other of any changes. We can also set up that too. So we have right now, we have 1 network adapter. So for this, just as testing, we're just going to use 1 adapter. So you may notice some errors right here. Validate multiple arbitration. Okay, we're testing disks. Testing the disks right now to make sure the disks are okay, because we have no disks, right? There they go. They bring them back. They go away. They bring them back. So this testing is just testing the disconnect, reconnect of the disks to make sure that the actual clustering can work. So right now, the disks look like they're connected to both servers. So who can own them? Only one can be written at a time. So you see the disks are here. See how they're disappearing? Because it's running the tests. So go back to server 1 while we watch the rest of this test. Like I did, brought it up, I showed you disks are going away, coming back, going away, coming back, and they're just passing all the tests. That's what they're doing. So we told this test to validate every single thing it needs to validate through the cluster, and then let us know what will not work. And then we'll work through some things that can just show you we can get past for now. Now there's a test with firewalls, so depending on what you're doing between the machines, because remember Windows Firewall is enabled by default. So you may have to open up some ports between each other to talk. What I usually do is I go here to check to see if there's any rules. Right, file remote server, file services, print sharing, they're already enabled because they're in the domain, so the servers do trust each other. So they should be okay. So go through our test. It says finish, summary, check. It's all done. So validated, success, 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 success. Okay. There's warnings. Network communication, that's probably because dual NICs, as I mentioned, for a network adapter, because it only has one. Software update would probably have to put some Windows patches to catch it up because each server has to be the exact same level. There's the network warning again, but for the most part, they're all here. So it says testing is completed to review the report. Right, the warnings. Searchable for node. Okay, buy one pair of NIC because we only have one network adapter. That's what it's saying. You know, they both can't reach each other from two separate NICs. So we're going to say finish because we're good. So now it's letting us go forward because those minor things, it's just recommending that you do have two network adapters. By all means, in a production environment, definitely, because if you have one network adapter go down, you have the other one to fall back on. Okay, and your network adapter could be on different switches too. So if the one switch goes down, taking down a network, you have another fallback switch as well, kind of like a DR setting. Okay, so let's start off with a cluster name. So the cluster name, we're going to call this 2020 cluster, just to make it easier. Oh, keyboard's got some lazy keys here. Our network is going to be this, and now we have to give it an IP address. So let's ping address. Let's go with 32. Okay, so 32 looks like it's available. Type in here 32. So we're giving the cluster an address. Now, why this is important, have to be logged in as an administrator to do this. Click next. It's going to now go out and do something. Show you what it's doing. So what it does now, it goes to our domain controller. Hey, now watch here. I'm going to refresh the screen. Hey, there's nothing there yet. Go over here again, back to the file server. See how it says, okay, you are ready to create the cluster, right? So I'm going to go full screen so we see this. Ready to create the cluster. Two machines, the DNS, Active Directory services, they're already there. Again, we have to go back to the domain controller. Right, we have that enabled. Let's open up DNS. This is something for the reason the education part of this. I'm teaching you or showing you how to do this. Take a look here, right? So DNS, these are very important, and computer name. They're very important to see. If you don't have the administrative rights to create records, this cluster will fail. It will not create the records. It will think it did and go ahead and the cluster won't start. So if you have issues with that, that's what's going to happen. If it doesn't write a DNS record, it's going to call by name, the 2020 cluster name, right? So if it can't call by name, telling the name to use, then it will fail. 2020 cluster.compiguide.info. That's okay. So here we go. Going to add. Right now, it's going to create the record. Go back to our domain controller. Right. Refresh. It didn't write a record yet. What about here? Did it write a record yet? There you go. 2020 cluster. Let's go to DNS. You should see DNS record created, 2020 cluster with that IP address. Because we are logged on as a domain administrator, we had the rights to write in here. If you have any type of account that's delegated rights, you delegated rights to your task, but you don't have full domain admin, you may need to get more elevated, because if it can't write this record or can't write this record, your cluster will not work. It just breaks it right then and there. So it has to have enough rights to do that. So remember that in your troubleshooting. Check your Active Directory users' computers and make sure that record was created. It tells it it's a computer record, but it's for the cluster. And DNS is created because I had rights to add the DNS record with the address. Let's go back to file server, full screen. and it's finished. Click finish, and now we have a cluster. Okay, our role, we have no role, 2 nodes, they're both up. We have storage, no disks yet. Right, there's some disks there. It added them automatically, but we're going to change things around because we know what size we have. Automatically, it just takes your disks and puts them together. This is something we don't want to do. We want to right click on this, right? Go up here. Want to, instead of validate, you want to configure role. Next, right? We could tell it what we want to do with this. So if we're setting up a hypervisor broker or anything like that, we can do that. Virtual machine. If you're typing any kind of role, we don't want to add any roles right now because we're going to add SQL later, but we could say file server. So if you wanted to create a fault tolerant file server system where you have one and the other always up, you could do that with DFS. So we don't want to do any roles right now. What we want to do is we want to find out how we could reconfigure the disks. To go more action, I want to say configure quorum. So we want to select a quorum witness, right? Configure quorum witness. I want to pick that 1 GB drive. So which disk is that? So is it 1? 15 gig? No. That's 10 gig, 12, 13 gig, right? There's the 1 megabyte. So it shows the 1 GB drive. So that was good. Now we know disk 4 is the quorum. And we have disk 3, right? 13 gig, 10 gig. So we know this is going to be SQL data. Going, see how this is SQL data. We know this is going to be the logs, and we know this is going to be the backup drive. So let's look and see who is the active node. Right now we have GHIJ, F, GHI, okay? It says storage is online, assigned to available storage, right? What we want to do is find out who the node is. We go to node and we say, we go to disks, right? They're online. And what we want to do is we want to say move available storage, select node. We want to choose 2. Watch what happens here. They're gone. The quorum just sits there. Let's go over to 2. Right? 2, you have the disks. So let's open up the cluster tool here. Failover cluster. So we're on disk 2, server 2, sorry. Skip this tool. And now we want to go here, 2020 cluster, nodes. Right? Assigned value, current value, okay. Storage. Of online. And the owner is FS2, right? That's this one. Now, what if we want to move the cluster over here? We could right click on here, say more actions, right? We could do a simulate failure, right? Brings it back, puts it back on 1. So let's say, right click on here, move storage, best possible node. Takes it right back to number 1. Let's go back to number 1. This or there again. We go here, say move storage 2. Everything goes over to 2 now. Go here, the disks are gone. So that's it. We just created a storage cluster. Right? We can set up pools and closures. Right now we just want to set up that. So network cluster, right? There's our network cluster. That's our network. Called cluster network number 1. And our roles, we have no roles yet. We have nodes. Now, if we want to take this down for maintenance, what you want to do is right click and you say pause, drain roles. So this means everything from 1 will disappear. This should too. There you go. So because we drained the roles, it means we paused it. Now what we could do is reboot this server. Right? Now let's go to 2. Let's go to nodes. It's down. It's being rebooted. But you notice the disks are all still alive. So we just did maintenance on one host. We rebooted it. Everything's still alive. So when you get to this network, remember we called this 2020 cluster, right? So if we had a network share, we could say 2020 cluster / share name, because that would be the server name in this case. Instead of saying FS1 or FS2, this is what you would reference now, 2020 cluster. That's the computer name. So if I go here and type, right, it's got no shares. So let's go to number 2. Let's create a share. Let's go data. Let's make a folder called share. Right, new folder. Name share 1. Okay, right click on it. Properties. Go sharing, share, click share. Done. Right. Go advanced. Share this folder, right? Permissions. Everyone full patrol. Right? That wide open share. Says must be online same node, right? So there's a reason for this. For one, it's a cluster drive. You can't set it up unless you have a actually have a file server role. So it could be using shares on that disk. So we will show you that later. So let's go back to file server 1. It's back online. Let's go back to file server 2. Right? Nope. And let's unpause or resume. Now we could say resume and do not fail back roles. What that means is everything will stay on here. If we say resume, right, it's already resumed now because it's there. We could have said resume failback roles and it would have failed everything back to that number 1. So let's say we want to reboot number 2 now because of patching. What we want to say is pause, drain roles. Now you see number 2, this should disappear. Right? Go to disks, they're all in FS1 now. So we could reboot number 2. Go back here, go back to number 1. And that's it. That's Windows clustering, very basic. There's more advanced stuff you can do. I just wanted to show the basic just to get the cluster up and running. And that's it. So what we've done here is we created a cluster. It's created a computer record because that's the computer name of the cluster that you're going to go directly to. And then that way, if one host is down, you could still get to the cluster. We have a DNS record, which is pointing it to that name. So let's close this because we're done here. Number 1 is online. Go back to clustering tools. So what I usually do is I usually right click on this, pin to start. I also like to pin it to taskbar. So this way it's always here. I don't have to go searching because I don't care about Windows tools. Okay, so you go here. Now we could go through the clustering events and it might find some issues that, so go disk, cluster role, cluster group failed, right? Disk 4, that's the quorum drive. So we could do that. We could look at there. If you know what it is or you want to find out, what I usually do is I reset them. See, okay, there's nothing here to make sure if it's an ongoing issue or whether it's an older issue to deal with. And usually you get a little red mark up here if you have a problem. So we have the both nodes here. Now, one happens when the drives fail over. So everything is on number 1 right now. That's where I am right now, 1. Now number 2 I want to bring online, but I don't want to fail back. Or let's say I do. So So we say room, right, resume, failback roles. What's going to happen now is the drives are going to go back. There. So they're both up. Storage, disks, both still on one. But we told to fail back. Now that could be because the other server isn't quite up yet. So the services may not have started. Could be anything. Or it could be just a delay. Go full screen. Close those. Cancel alert. And I want to go back to we're on the domain controller. Let's go back down so it's easier. File server 1. So file server 1 is still the ruler of the roost. Let's go to 2 or 1, sorry. Let's say drain roles. Okay, so we're getting them off of number 1. We're going to flow them over to 2. We force it to go and it's paused. Well, let's say we want to bring it back on, but don't fail back. So it just says the services are there. So if the cluster has to fail, it can. If there's a hardware failure, it can. And the disks are still over there. So at this point, let's leave this video down. It's done. We have clustering done. So this is Windows 2019 clustering. Very basic, set up and running with iSCSI on the domain controller. So this is how we set up our lab with iSCSI as well. So thanks for watching. Click like, subscribe. I don't care if you do or don't. This is just training videos I like to do to help people out. And if you need more information on it, please post a comment. I'll try and give you more information. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.